So Trish, if you're just joining us, we're just introducing ourselves in the chat with our names and where we're logging in from tonight. It's good to have you with us. So we'll just let people kind of roll in as they do. We have about 20 people registered, so I think we'll be getting some late joiners, and that's okay. We'll just we'll keep being mindful of your timetable for tonight. And I know Brett has a firm end time at 7 for family stuff. So so we'll get going so we don't miss too much time with him. My name is Katie Klein. I'm the executive director of Moose Jaw. And for those of you that don't know that acronym, I too mistook it at first for a jaw of a moose, but it is MUUSJA, and that stands for the Minnesota Unitarian Universalist Social Justice Alliance. I do have a little cold and sore throat situation, so please excuse the gravelly voice. Before we get started, I just wanted to highlight an upcoming program we have this Monday evening, November 13th at 6:30 p.m. Happens to be quite timely. It's a forum on combating hate in Minnesota. Moose Jaw is part of an interfaith coalition called Communities Combating Hate, where we advocate for policy changes and educating communities about the role that various hate movements play in our current political environment. So facilitating, we have Bishara Mohammed, who is the Civic Engagement Manager for Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, and Brandon Schorsch, Director of Jewish Community Action's Combating Hate Program. So that's Monday evening at 6:30, a very timely, relevant, and important conversation. So the information for that program is on our website, moosejaw.org. And then I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that a week from today is Give to the Max Day. You probably know that well from your inbox, your email inbox, starting to get a little crowded with Give to the Max information. But we do rely on our sustaining donors to resource our movement. So if you are planning to give this Thursday, I hope you'll keep Moose Jaw in your giving plans. So on to tonight's program and our special guest, Brett Cease. We're so glad to have you with us, Brett. Up there with the snowy birch tree background. Tonight's program is part of our Conversations in Community series, where we spend time getting to know our UU activists from across Minnesota and the Dakotas. Brett serves as Vice President of Programs for the Citizens Climate Lobby, where he strives to develop learning pathways that create the most empowered and informed citizen lobbyists possible. Brett began his career in northern Minnesota as a wilderness program director and lead instructor for several outdoor education nonprofits, including Outward Bound. Connecting civic engagement with democratic participation and issues-based advocacy, Brett has taught undergraduate policy courses, high school social studies, and campus sustainability with dual master's degrees in education and legislative studies and a PhD in public policy and political economy. Brett is a fellow Duluthian. Shout out to Duluth, Kathy. And always looks forward to the next local ultimate Frisbee game, time with his beautiful wife, dusting off his cello, fishing on the river, and home brewing craft beer. All right, very full life there, Brett. It's good to have you with us.
Well, thank you. That was a very in-depth bio, and I'm honored to be here tonight. And obviously, just want to uplift what a dear friend you are personally, Katie. How excited I am for you and your role here as executive director now of Moose Jaw, and how moved I have been since returning to Minnesota to be a part of Moose Jaw's important advocacy.
Thank you, Brett. Yeah, Brett is a dear friend as well. So this is a special evening for me too. Well, we're going to start out with a question that is inspired from, I don't know if any of you ever listened to the On Being podcast. It used to be called Speaking of Faith with Krista Tippett. Um, and she always starts out with a question that I personally find fascinating as a social justice activist and as a faith leader. And the question that she begins with is, how would you begin to talk about the religious or spiritual background of your childhood in whatever way you think of that?
I would love that. Yeah, and big shout out, I guess, full circle to the amazing work that our local congregation here in Duluth does. Behind me now in the screen, I've shifted from birch to the roof that we have. I believe one of the earliest taking advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act funds to support congregational settings for solar. And the amazing work that the green roof that preceded my involvement with our local congregation. I think Duluth is one of the only congregations in the country actually to have both solar and actual kind of green roof design all in one congregational setting. And I share that by way of kind of coming full circle in your original question, I guess, Katie. For me, as I'm guessing for many of us, I grew up in a very different faith tradition, not very, a different faith tradition. And I think the experience of finding a home as an adult in the spiritual community of UU was a wonderful arrival point for, a case like this. But for me, especially early on in life, the kind of inspirational sources or kind of that spiritual background of childhood really came through, we talk so much about the 6 sources within kind of our faith traditions. And, for me, the source, I guess, that was the most powerful was kind of as a kiddo, just that transcendent mystery of the natural world, that wonder that comes when you see a seed grow or you see the seasons cycle through, and just being connected to the backyard that we had. Right across the street, there was a pond with spring peepers and, ducks in the summer, and throughout the fall, beautiful leaves and the transition of turtles settling down for the winter months. And I think that kind of natural world connection has always kind of infused my spirit. And obviously, as you shared kind of in the bio of my own background, just really been what has been at the heart of me wanting to do ongoing work to connect, especially the upcoming generation, with that same sense of connection and inspiration.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brett. So, share a little bit about how you got involved with the Citizens Climate Lobby and the focus of the organization's work and your work there.
I'd love to. And a shout out, I know, to Diane, also on the line here tonight, a CCLer and part of our UU action team with CCL, the largest faith-based action team that CCL has. But my way of finding out about Citizens Climate Lobby came in 2011 when I had transitioned from being outdoor program director of a camp here on the South Shore of Lake Superior. I moved back home to be closer to my family. And that was obviously where the teaching gigs were easier for me to get to. And I had done a lot of work with 350, and before that, it was known as Step It Up as a campaign, and loved the day of actions that it was known at that point for doing, organizing a big, awareness, around all of these events happening on the same day. But it was like, what else do I do the rest of the year? I really want this to be something that I can embody throughout my lifestyle. And I'll never forget the opportunity came for us to start a local chapter at CCL, which was just getting started at that point in 2011. And what I immediately fell in love with, which I think, again, as all Unitarians here on the line can resonate with, it had a very different culture than what I was used to or had already kind of come to expect within the climate movement. And the approach it took is, again, kind of guided by this open inquiry of spirit of getting to know and understand, people that may think differently than us. It really, since the very beginning, has had at its core this approach of treating everyone that we meet with, even if they are outright, not convinced that the climate is changing or it should be a policy priority, with respect, appreciation, and gratitude, and to use kind of that relational capital that we can build up over time to really help shift and engage Congress on one of the most critical issues of obviously the era that we're in. So that approach and that clear methodology too, of really being able to have within a couple of months of being involved, the confidence and the awareness of how to be able to participate in my government. I'll never forget, I took the megabus to DC my first summer, and it was back in the day when they had $1 ticket fares if you were the first person to get on any leg of a ticket. So I got to DC for $4 on a bus, and just being able to walk in the halls of Congress and again kind of feel that exhilarating rush that you also get in the natural world, on a canoe trip in the Boundary Waters or whatever, just that exhilaration of realizing I am here. This is such an important place, and I'm also being listened to and engaging on an issue that I care about and feeling heard. It was transformational. So.
Wow, that's a super powerful story. I remember that from my time in DC, also just being so kind of like wowed by how accessible those buildings and access to legislatures and legislators is there. That so I can see why that sparks some passion for you. So what does a typical day look like for Brett Cease at CCL?
Well, like you shared, Katie, basically the organization Citizens Climate Lobby exists as a two-part mission to create the political will for a livable world through enabling all of us to achieve personal and political breakthroughs in exercising our own power. And so my role, having grown up kind of in this organization from being a volunteer group leader to a volunteer state coordinator to a regional coordinator on staff to education director, now to this role currently where I'm in with vice president of programs, all of those, the throughput is empowering everyone around us to realize we can throw off kind of the shackles of feeling despondent about the powerlessness that we often feel when we watch the news and we see Congress refusing to take action or another event happening that is directly tied to climate change. And why the heck aren't people paying attention? Action is the antidote to despair, and we are all about generating action and having the collective action, that collective power of all of us throughout the country, all 400 plus chapters of CCL, engage our members of Congress and our communities in moving this forward through what we call the 5 levers of political will. So I'm all about basically supporting our 400 plus chapter leaders, our 10 regions, our 87 state coordinators, making sure that they have the resources that they need, gaining their feedback, meeting with them, making sure to collect kind of input and steer the direction of our legislative advocacy with our DC team, and really trying to have that conduit of being a voice for what we're experiencing in the field with our programs and having that funneled ultimately into our legislative strategy.
I'm glad you touched on that issue of despair, because I hear so frequently people feeling a loss of hope and really struggling with climate grief, or the feeling that the problem feels so overwhelming that they just want to throw in the towel and admit defeat. But for you, taking action is what is the antidote to those feelings for you.
That is definitely a big piece. Joan Baez has that quote, hope, or that action is the antidote to despair. But
Yeah.
I do feel like the other piece that I actually wanted to share, I've got a couple of quotes that I had looked up tonight. I wanted to kind of read out loud at some point. And the one that kind of jumps out to me with what you are reflecting on there, Katie, actually comes from the amazing writer Rebecca Solnit, who I'm guessing a lot of you know. And she has actually just recently come out with a new book. This is from her older book, Difficult is Not the Same as Impossible. And what she writes about is hope. And that, I think, is also something that all of us here on the line or those listening in later can really resonate with, because that's what we're trying to provide right now to the next generation, to each other, in moments that feel dark. And she writes, hope is not optimism. Optimism assumes the best and assumes its inevitability. which leads to passivity, as do the pessimism and cynicism that assume the worst. Hope, like love, means taking risks and being vulnerable to the effect of loss. It means recognizing the uncertainty of the future, which we certainly know is uncertain, and making a commitment to try to participate in shaping it. It means facing difficulties and accepting uncertainty. To hope is to recognize that you can protect some of what you love, even while grieving what you cannot, and to know that we must act without knowing the outcome of all of our actions. And I think really that ties directly into what you were just saying too, Katie.
Yeah, that's extremely powerful. Which book did that quote come from?
This is from The Difficult is Not the Same as Impossible.
Okay. Yeah, that is extremely powerful. I mean, I thank you so much for sharing that. If you'd be willing to email that to me, I'll include it in a follow-up
Definitely.
email along with the book recommendation, because I know people are always asking for resources, for ways to sustain their efforts and their hope in the face of climate crisis.
And I'll just share one more then too, real quick. This is
Yeah,
another
no,
one by
please do.
a favorite of all of ours, Pema Chodron. And this, I guess, also speaks to the choice, but also, okay, this is from the places that scare you. And Pema writes, we can let the circumstances of our life harden us so that we become increasingly resentful and afraid, or we can let them soften us and make us kinder and more open to what scares us. We always have this choice. And I think for us in, the climate, social justice, environmental justice space, that choice is one that oftentimes can feel daunting or overwhelming. But I love that, her recommendation to lean into that choice and to realize, it's presented to us every day.
That's powerful. I think I like that idea too of leaning into softness, because there's so much sort of anger and rage that comes with this work, right? Like, why aren't they doing something? And it's so easy to fall into bitterness. And so maintaining that softness seems like really critical in this work. So thank you for bringing that forward, Brett. Um, what do you see as some of the most pressing climate issues facing Minnesota these days? Or specifically, I'm curious about the Lake Superior watershed, um, as far as what's sort of rising to the top of priority and urgency right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's so many, and I'm by no means an expert across the board. I think it's important to acknowledge, especially given that you started kind of with that broader lens of Minnesota, just the historic work that this last legislative session has put into action with funding across so many policies and
Mhm.
so many initiatives that have kind of been backburnered for our state for a long time. And in one fell 5-month swoop, all got enacted finally. So I think the first thing is obviously just, policy wise, making sure to continue to build on and support the awareness and the implementation of all those policies.
Mhm.
And I know that there's a lot of great work, and former Senate staffer for Tina Smith, Pete Wyckoff, now being back here in the Department of Commerce and helping roll out all the funding implementation for the Inflation Reduction Act here locally is a huge source of inspiration. I think, outside of the policy, as far as impacts itself, I mean, clearly the twin impacts that are changing climate in Duluth play for both the ongoing extreme weather events that we're seeing. It's clear that everywhere in the country likes to build Duluth as climate proof at this point, or somehow kind of impacted by the changing that we're seeing in other parts of the country, even more extreme. But we are absolutely still a part of that bullseye. My wake up call, actually, I was going to share this earlier, that kind of activated me as far as being climate concerned, was hearing Dr. Lee Frelich, the lead forestry researcher for the University of Minnesota, way back in 2009. He gave a presentation when I was an undergrad at Augsburg, and I went to a talk in Minneapolis that basically said, even then, he was already predicting, based on a lot of his early kind of forest kind of succession research, that the replacement of the coniferous northern boreal forest was already transitioning, and business as usual emission scenarios would mean in my lifetime that we would see a succession of basically forest canopy from the amazing, tall white pine and all of the surrounding ecosystem, species that we're used to within northern Minnesota here, to eventually scrub oak savanna, which again, no offense to Kansas and Nebraska and the amazing communities that live within that space, live with, but we are obviously known for and have a duty to protect what we have here. And it just woke me up because the timeline just didn't feel real. The severity of the transition from one of the most well-respected scientists in our state, and I know obviously that continues to be the case today, now 15 years later still. But I would say for me, that is still one of the biggest impacts that we face, is just, again, that succession that our forestry industry isn't fully ready for, our tourism industry isn't ready for, all of the local employment that so much of the northern Minnesota community, with the way of life that, whoever you talk to, we want to defend. I think drawing those connections is absolutely key.
Yeah. Well, given all of these challenges that we're facing, I'm curious, how can we as individual citizens most effectively advocate for change, either policy change or take action in other ways? What would be your recommendation? Both, I'm curious about individuals and then congregations or faith communities or other, collective groups.
I love this, and there is no one perfect answer. I'll give you a couple of thoughts here, but I can't wait for others to put in the chat or the ongoing series to keep highlighting additional options and avenues. The thing that I like to think of is the climate movement, which within CCL exists as an ecosystem itself. And for any ecosystem to thrive, you have to have species that have niches, and to be able to fill that kind of symbiotic relationship across the overall system. And so the beautiful thing about CCL is we have a niche. I'm happy to talk about it, given that that's my day job. But I would say more than anything, for those on the line tonight, obviously, for those listening in, for all of the work we have in influencing the people in our lives, helping people get activated based on their interests and passions and skill set is at the heart of what we each can do. And there was a wonderful podcast for several years, I'm guessing many of you may have listened to it, called How to Save a Planet, that was co-led by Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, an amazing marine biologist and ocean scientist. And they came up with this Venn diagram of a triple overlapping circle that helped you kind of thinking about how you wanted to get involved in the climate movement, basically identify your passion, where that intersects with the climate's movement, and then what kind of skill sets you're bringing within kind of your background. And where kind of the middle of those three overlapping circles exist is where, the recommendation again from that podcast was you can be most impactful, and that can change over time depending on the expertises you take on or the passion that you have. But I absolutely love thinking about that, because there is no one right way. Now, that all being said, I'll let you know real quick about what CCL does. And you can absolutely plug into us even listening in tonight or after, any time to consider. Basically, I'll put this in the chat. It's really easy. You can just go to cclusa.org/intro, and that will kind of let you know a little bit more about what we are and who we're up to, or who we are and what we're up to. But basically, yeah, the long and the short of it is that CCL has a chapter-based model so that you can have the opportunity to plug in with a local team, because we know so much of any advocacy, whether it's climate, social justice, you name it, you need to have a community supporting you. It's hard to continue to do the work if you feel alone. And so that's why I think that secret kind of social science piece of CCL, it's all about having a community built in right there of support. But we're focused, like I hinted at earlier, on 5 levers, which we think are absolutely essential to moving Congress and the country forward on climate. Lobbying, hence the name, Citizens Climate Lobbying, and then media work, grassroots outreach, grass tops engagement, and then chapter development. And all of those are based on what you might be interested in. Lobbying, we want to get everyone to meet with their member of Congress as often as they're interested in. And even if they're not meeting, contacting them, calling them. We're generating hundreds of thousands of emails and handwritten letters and phone calls and tweets, you name it, every year, amplifying that this is an issue to continue to pay attention to. Media work, we're really well known, even here locally, but throughout the country, in getting op-eds and letters to the editor published. We train volunteers how to do media interviews with radio and television, especially to amplify this important cause. On the grassroots outreach, we train individuals on how to table and show up at like public events, from farmers markets to activity fairs at campuses, you name it, to giving presentations to Rotary clubs, to women's groups, to you name it. And then grass tops engagement, who are the connections we have in the community, from civic leaders to faith leaders to business leaders, that we can bring in and have join our meetings and have their moral authority also amplify our message. And then lastly, on the group development side of things, we only do things as effective as the number of people we have. And so if you're a people person and you like reaching out and engaging and bringing the bars to the next chapter meeting, or calling and texting people to make sure they feel included and inviting, that's absolutely equally essential too. So if you're a glue person, that's another great role. And that would be, I guess, a very high level, quick overview.
Thank you. That's so helpful. I love that you shared this idea of this intersection of where the needs of the movement meet your skills and talents, right? Because I think it's so overwhelming if you're looking at the whole, climate catastrophe and feeling like you need an extremely high level understanding of science or else of lobbying and how to navigate the halls of Congress. But if you are a writer, writing an op-ed, or if you are an artist, you can make posters and protest signs. And if you are a lawyer, there's finding that intersection seems so important. So thank you for lifting that up. As far as congregations, would you sort of take the same angle, like, resource or asset mapping within a congregation and finding channels there, or other ways for faith communities to act?
Oh yeah, I totally neglected that part of it. I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay.
I mean,
No.
the biggest thing that here locally that I can speak to with the climate action team that UUCD here in Duluth has, or you name it, is just finding whether it's already the existing Green Sanctuary program, the amazing work that the Ministry for Earth UU team does. When I lived in Texas, while I was getting my doctorate, I became, good friends with Allie, and I know the amazing succession now that's happening within that program provides wonderful content, being able to highlight kind of in, ready-made ways for your congregation. I can't speak enough to both of those. And the beautiful thing also about CCL with our Unitarian Universalist Action Team is we find ways or intersections. If people are interested after tonight listening in and they're like, oh, I like CCL. Well, we actually have a ready-made action team for Unitarians that also meets and says, oh, what is CCL doing that could then apply to our UU congregations? But absolutely any of those avenues, and I would say all of them. I know in our UUCD side of things, the big initiatives outside of just like greening the church and caring for all of the amazing outdoor and roof space include ongoing advocacy and like letter writing campaigns. The vision that Beth Tamminen and so many other leaders had for many years, realizing actually like having physical infrastructure built out, not a lot of congregations yet have solar. So I think that is such an important first step, and so empowering to, see it come to full fruition and reaching out to others if you're stuck. Then having movie nights and having educational opportunities to have speakers come in and engage your congregation in dialogue about intersections that matter most to you.
That's great ideas, Brett. So this UUCCL group, is this a national group, or are there local chapters, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's kind of goofy. So CCL is chapter based. So we have 400 groups like in Duluth or Fergus
Mhm.
Falls or, whatever. But then we also have national action teams. And so let's just say you're like, hey, you know what? I like my local chapter, but I actually really want to help lead our electrification action team and our efforts to push electrification policy. Or faith is a really important priority to me. So I really want to mainly actually focus on our Unitarian Universalist intersections for CCL.
Mhm.
Shout out to the amazing Nadine and Anne who co-lead our UU action team. It's nationally based, so congregation members throughout the country. They normally have 20 plus attendees every meeting from UU congregations around the country, and it's both a community for them within CCL, but then a way for them to share and reflect, and then bring back out to their congregations what we're up to.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's extremely helpful information. And if we're interested in getting involved with that, would we just find it on the website? On your
Yeah, I can easily connect you after this to a link, but yeah, there's an action team directory that we have, and I've got the link to it actually right here. You would need to join CCL
uh-huh.
in order for it to be able to officially join the group.
Right.
But here is the link in the chat now where you could copy that and put it
That's
in.
excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, one or two more questions, and then we'll open it up to the group. This is just kind of a fun one. Who are some of the climate activists that inspire you the most?
I love this one. These are all so great. I mean, the quick answer is clearly just every day. I pinch myself. I'm so grateful. I get to read emails from group leaders that are doing inspirational work in CCL and seeing the coalitions they're building or the relationship they're moving forward with their member of Congress or the new volunteers they're able to engage. And that absolutely is, food for my soul.
Yeah.
I would say on the national level, clearly we don't want to have this kind of cult of personality where only the big names and leaders are making a difference. I really think that it's so key to uplift the everyday work of people like you and me and whoever that are obviously putting in the time and helping shift the attitudes and the hearts and minds of the community members that we have access to. But I definitely, from again, the amazing work, I actually had the book right here that Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkerson put together. They wrote an anthology called All We Can Save. I can't say that as a book I can't say that name enough. It's a wonderful set of writing, all by women, all to do with the intersection of climate and how they find it expressed through poetry, through essay form, through all sorts of amazing written medium. And I just think that it's like a total perfect intersection with what we as UUs look for when we're looking for inspiration. So I would point people to that.
Wow, thank you so much. I've jotted that down. And we'll look for it at my library. I don't know that book. So thank you. I'm looking forward to checking that out.
Yeah.
Okay, last official question. So what is your hope for future generations, Brett?
Boy, yeah. I think clearly, you can talk about this from a scientific target lens or from a cultural standpoint or from a personal empowerment lens. Clearly the hope is a livable world for the future. That's really centering any of our shared work here. I want a future that, my cooing infant son that you can maybe hear in the background, Quest, has just as much of the right and the experience to have the stability of a climate that nurtures his development and ability for all kids. I think one thing I also just wanted to kind of, I guess, reflect on or zoom out. I feel like in some ways this is a little bit different than messaging that we often get, but I became a parent and several years ago now, and I was expecting this watershed moment of just expecting all of a sudden now my climate advocacy was even more important. And it's important, but I feel like what I realized after slowing down to reflect that there wasn't that additional light bulb moment is that so often we have these narratives, I think especially in the US or a lot of kind of the global north, where it's like my kids, my family, my freedoms, whatever. But it's like we are fighting for children that have no, role in contributing to the mess that we have created. And I think that just really hit home for me. When you have the connection to your own kids, but when you really zoom out and you think about all of the young adults right now that are in a world that has such a precipice that we're facing.
Yeah.
So my hope and my vision for the future is that each of those kids from any country, any place in the world you can imagine, just have the opportunities that we've had and that we're fighting for them. So that's my answer. Yeah.
Well, we're grateful to you, Brett, for all the work that you're doing to advance that vision. And may it be so. Well, what questions do you all have for Brett? I see one here. I would like to hear about CCL and its philosophy. I think you generally covered that, but is there anything you want to touch on there just about sort of, I guess, the general philosophy of CCL in terms of its organizational mission?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love, I guess, Paul, feel free to even unmute or clarify. Again, the whole goal, the origin story of CCL is that a gentleman by the name of Marshall Saunders, who was just a wonderful mentor to so many of us. He passed away 3 years ago now. He basically woke up to the issue of climate change through watching An Inconvenient Truth. He saw it kind of, well, what's it going to be? I don't know. He even, identified as conservative growing up a lot of his life. And so he had all these, stereotypes around Al Gore. And it just totally shifted something inside. He watched it 3 times in the first weekend, and he became obsessed with climate change. And he just was waiting for an organization that was like, okay, we know the issue. We know who we have to move. Who are the players right now that are getting everyday people to meet frequently with Congress? And after, trying out a couple of other groups, he was like, I kind of feel like there isn't something yet that I quite identified that does that. And so that's the birth of CCL. And his whole goal was, rather than any of us individually changing to CFL light bulbs or LEDs now, or, becoming vegan, the power of collective action, and each of those actions is key, but it takes millions of us to do that. And if we can get the Margaret Mead quote, nothing, changes the world more than a small dedicated group of individuals that are, focused on their democratic civic rights. That's the only thing that has changed the world. Like, if we can have that model applied to Congress and change their behavior, that was kind of the fulcrum of the lever he wanted to envision pulling, and to bring as many people that were just everyday constituents like you and me with. And so that really is the guiding philosophy of the organization, I guess, in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Paul, does that get at your question, or do you have any follow-ups?
Oh, hang on. Hi. Yeah, I was actually thinking in more detail about the carbon fee and how it works in a nutshell. What do we do to talk to Senator Smith or Senator Klobuchar regarding the carbon fee?
Yeah, so CCL was known synonymously for years, and still is, with a key policy that basically we didn't invent, but we've really tried to help popularize, known as carbon fee and dividend, which is basically a 3-legged stool approach. You put a steadily rising fee on all fossil fuel emissions. You give the money back to households so that nobody, especially from lower or middle income households, faces rising energy costs. They actually get more money back in that monthly cashback or dividend. And then you make sure, if we're doing it domestically, we have what's called a carbon border adjustment internationally that accounts for international trade. And what I would recommend doing is, we were known, that is literally the only thing that we advocated for whenever we met with Congress. We've now expanded our policy agenda so people still know we as volunteers want to see that happen. And now we're playing both short game and long game. So we want to see aspirational, transformational policies like fee and dividend enacted, And we also know there's short-term gains to be had, and we're pushing for those too. And so we actually just this week, leading up to it, we had a series of trainings with our government affairs staff where we kind of gave the background of what our main ask is for this fall conference and lobby week push. But this week we're meeting with 300 plus offices right now across the country online. We kind of used to do 2 days in DC, and then we're like, hey, we can save a carbon footprint if one of them is online every year. So now we still go to DC in June and bring in, 2,000 advocates. And then in the November, December timeframe every year, we meet online exclusively, which is also more accessible for a lot of people that can't afford the time or the travel to get to DC. And so we're really intentional about trying to especially bring voices in that may not make it to the June days. And we're specifically actually focusing on something called the Big Wires Act. For our November lobby for our November lobby days, in addition to, again, reminding, hey, we still like carbon fee and dividend. When can you support this bill that's now known as the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act behind it? And what Big Wires would do is it would essentially establish minimum transfer protocols in a kind of a shared grid format. Right now, there's so many bottlenecks, not only to permitting renewable energy projects, but then how do you actually kind of share the energy across all of the interregional kind of transmission operators? And this would set a minimum standard so that you have more incentive for any particular grid to build out more renewables, because they know they can either export them to other regions in need, think like the Texas blackout several winters ago, or take them in if they need it themselves. So that's kind of the key piece of the network trying to crack with this lobby session.
Thank you, Brett. Did that answer your question, Paul? Yep.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very succinctly, very well done. Thank you.
No, thank you for asking, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions for Brett tonight?
Anything that you were coming tonight hoping to engage in conversation with? I'm all ears. I'm so
What
grateful
are
for
your
this space.
your pressing climate questions? This is your chance. We have an expert.
No.
It's delightful. I don't have a question. I've been involved with the local group for a couple of years, and and have not participated in a lot of lobbying or any lobbying, but you're very articulate, and I appreciate what you're saying, and it's just fun to reach out to hear from other people. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Right back at you, Betsy. Thank you.
Yeah, we so appreciate your time, Brett, and just contributing your wisdom and your insights. And can we support your work or the work of CCL in some financial way? Is there a link to donate that you could provide that we can support the organization?
Yes, you are always welcome to donate. I mean, we are happy to engage on kind of thinking about the financial piece of donating. And I also just want to give a big shout out to, I mean, what makes CCL or any organization like Moose Jaw magical is the time that people donate. And, with our 200,000 plus volunteers throughout the world, I mean, that is the piece that, none of us would be here without that. And the same, obviously, for Moose Jaw. So I think it's especially essential just to name that, because I don't. The great thing, like Diane put in the chat, is there's no expectation. You don't need to, there's no dues for CCL. We're not going to, email you to remind you that your membership's up after 11 months or anything like that. It's all free. We have a fundamental philosophy that all of the training and education we provide, and that's really kind of the heart of my job, is all available to anyone. So we don't like paywall the website that's on.
Yeah.
You could listen right now to, a training that is all about, here, I'll just share this link here. This is CCL Community's homepage. This is kind of the program architect for our intranet called CCL Community. And there's a whole tab there called Resources and Training. If you want to find out about our recommendations on how to meet with your mayor, how to write a letter to the editor or table for the first time or host a climate presentation party. It's all there, and just check it out. We would love for you, even if you don't formally join CCL, to be a lurker. We won't be offended, and we're just glad for all of your involvement, because the whole goal is moving that dial down together. So.
Yep. Yep. Well, we'll be sure to link that from our resources page on the Moose Jaw site too. So that can be another gateway to all of that information and those great resources.
That's
So
great,
it's
Katie.
CCL's community site. Thank you. Thank you, Diane, for providing that. Okay, well, I guess we'll wrap things up and let everybody get to their dinners and their evenings. But thank you so much for all of you for showing up and engaging on this critical issue and getting to know Brett a little bit. And Brett, thank you so much for your time and commitment and vision and everything.
My
everything
honor.
you bring to this important movement.
If you're all right with sharing one last quote to close with.
Yeah.
I'm just, as you can tell, I love reading climate writing. And this is a shout out. If many of you aren't familiar, some of these quotes I'm getting from the amazing Tone Lanzillo, who's also a Duluthian and is really good at stitching coalition around climate together. And he has a subscription called the Klima Practice Project. And this quote then he's citing from Marianne Heglar, called from the book Here's Where You Come In, and then in parentheses, not too late. And it's speaking on behalf of the fact that this is not going to be a one and done campaign, but I'm sharing it because I feel like we all, the pacing is so essential, and to give ourselves permission in our lives to flow into times and spaces where we're engaged on this issue, and then we also can take a step back and focus on other pieces in our life. So this is what Mary writes, especially now at this critical stage, we have to accept that we're all going to have to buckle down for the long haul. Responding to this crisis is going to have to become part of who we are all the time. Once you understand that this isn't about climate action at all. It's about climate commitment. Mm-hmm. Climate action is recycling or voting or opting for a vegan meal. Climate commitment includes those singular actions, but it's still bigger. It's a framework, and it's asking yourself, what can I do next? And always next. So know that I'm honored to be asking that question with each of you. Reach out at all and all ahead, however we can support you. And thank you for the work that you do, Katie.
Thank you to all of you. That's a perfect ending, Brett, and you inspire me so much, and all of you do too for showing up and just being committed. So thank you. Thank you all for being here. Enjoy your evening, and this will be recorded and added to the resource page on the Moose Jaw page. So feel free to share it with your community members, your congregation, your family, and it's going to take all of us together. So spread the word.
You're here. Peace and love to all of you. Have a wonderful night.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.